Check this out. BSM Raider here, bringing you another Commander deck tech. Today we're looking at Vito, Thorn of the Dusk Rose. This is a all-in Vampires life gain deck. So our primary focus is just cast as many vampire spells as possible, gain as much life as possible, and do stupid, big, dumb things. So let's get right into it. The main premise of Vito is whenever we gain life, target opponent is going to lose that much life. And its activated ability, creatures we control are going to gain lifelink. So, let's get into all those vampires. First up is Knight of the Ebon Legion. This is a very low costing vampire with a activated ability. It'll get +3/+3 and gain Death Touch. And then at the beginning of our end step, if a player lost 4 or more life, we put a +1 counter on Knight of the Ebon Legion. Now we have Viscerous here. We're going to use this to sacrifice certain creatures to gain value. Now we have Vampire of the Dire Moon. This is a very efficient 1-drop vampire. It has Death Touch and Lifelink. Now we have Dracula, Lord of Blood, or Voldaren Bloodcaster. This is a vampire wizard. It's a 2/1 flyer. And whenever Voldaren Bloodcaster or another non-token creature goes to the graveyard, we create a blood token. Then whenever we create a blood token, if we control 5 or more blood tokens, it'll transform. It'll transform into Dracula, Lord of Bats, or Blood Bat Summoner. It'll become a 3/3 flyer. Then at the beginning of combat on our turn, up to 1 target blood token will become a 2/2 bat with flying and haste in addition to its other types. Now we have Cordial Vampire. Whenever Cordial Vampire or another creature is put into a graveyard, we're going to put a +1 counter on each vampire we control. Now we have Calastria Highborn. Whenever Calastria Highborn or another vampire is put into a graveyard, we can pay 1 black, and if we do, target player will lose 2 life and will gain 2 life. Okay, now we have Creeping Bloodsucker. At the beginning of our upkeep, Creeping Bloodsucker will deal 1 damage to each opponent, and then we're going to gain life equal to the damage dealt this way. Okay, now we have Bloodghast. We're going to use Bloodghast in many different ways. Primarily, he's here as our main sacrifice target. That way we can trigger whenever creatures go to the graveyard. Now we have Vampire Hexmage. This is a very good blocker because it has First Strike, but we're going to use Vampire Hexmage to deal with our opponent's planeswalkers or creatures that have a lot of counters on them by removing every single counter. Now we have Blood Artist. Don't really need to say too much more about Blood Artist. Whenever Blood Artist or another creature is put into a graveyard, target player loses 1 life, we gain 1 life. Now we have Drana, Liberator of Malakir. This is a very efficient vampire. It's a 2/3 flyer with First Strike, and whenever Drana deals combat damage to a player, we put a +1 counter on each attacking creature we control. And because Drana has First Strike, we're going to get that first initial attack first, and then regular combat damage. Now we have Yahenni, Undying Partisan. We're going to use Yahenni to protect himself, but also we're going to use him as a sacrifice outlet. And whenever any creature a opponent controls is put into a graveyard, we're going to put a +1 counter on Yahenni. Now we have Vampire Nighthawk. It's a 2/3 flying Death Touch lifelinker. Now we have a very powerful one. We have Captivating Vampire. He's going to give all our other vampire creatures +1/+1, and all we have to do is tap 5 untapped vampires, and we gain control of target creature. And that creature will become a vampire in addition to its other types. Similar to Bloodghast, we have Silver Smote Ghoul. At the beginning of our end step, if we gain 3 or more life that turn, we return Silver Smote from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. We can also sacrifice Silver Smote Ghoul to draw a card. Okay, now we have Vane Witch Coven. This is a 3/3 with Menace. Whenever we gain life, we can pay 1 black mana, and if we did, we can return target creature from our graveyard back to our hand. Now we have Bloodthirsty Aerialist. She's going to get bigger by putting a +1 counter on herself whenever we gain life. Now we have Nighthawk Scavenger. Similar to Vampire Nighthawk, this also has Flying, Death Touch, and Lifelink, but Nighthawk Scavenger's power is equal to 1 plus the number of different card types in your opponent's graveyard. Now we have Marauding Blight Priest. Whenever we gain life, each opponent will lose a life. Now we have Vampire Nocturnus. We play with the top card of our library revealed. As long as that top card is black, Vampire Nocturnus and other vampire creatures will get +2/+1 and flying. Now we have Sanctum Seeker. Whenever any vampire we control attacks, each opponent will lose a life and we're going to gain a life. Now we have Sangromancer. Whenever a creature a opponent controls is put into a graveyard, we can gain 3 life. And then whenever a opponent discards a card, we can gain 3 life as well. Now we have Falkenrath Noble. Whenever Falkenrath Noble or another creature dies, target player is going to lose a life, we're going to gain a life. And just to make sure our opponents are losing as much life as possible, we have Bloodletter of Aklazats. This is a 2/4 flying vampire demon. If a opponent would lose life during your turn, they lose twice that amount instead. Now we have Vindictive Vampire. Whenever another creature we control dies or goes to the graveyard, Vindictive Vampire will deal 1 damage to each opponent and we gain 1 life. Now we have Bloodline Keeper. This has a activated ability where we put a 2/2 black vampire token with flying. And then if we control 5 or more vampires, we can pay 1 black and transform Bloodline Keeper. And it transforms into Lord of Lineage. Other vampire creatures will get +2/+2, and then activate it. We put a 2/2 black vampire token with flying on the battlefield. Okay, now we have some very large vampires. We have Bloodthirsty Conqueror. This is a flying 5/5 vampire with Death Touch. Whenever a opponent loses life, we gain that much life. Now we have Bloodlord of Vazgoth. This is Bloodthirst 3. If a opponent was dealt damage this turn, this creature enters the battlefield with 3 +1 counters on it. And whenever we cast a vampire creature spell, that spell gains Bloodthirst 3 as well. Now we have Epicure of Blood. Whenever we gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. Now we have Vein Ripper. Vein Ripper is a very, very powerful vampire. It has Ward. In order to target this, your opponents will have to sacrifice a creature, which will trigger all those die triggers. And whenever any creature dies, target opponent will lose 2 and you'll gain 2. Now we have Nurkana Revenant. Whenever we tap a swamp for mana, it'll add a additional black mana. And then we can pay 1 black. Nurkana Revenant will get +1/+1. It's already a 4/4, but we're going to make it very, very large. Now we have the Haunt of Hightower. This is a 3/3 flying vampire with lifelink. Whenever the Haunt of Hightower attacks, defending player is going to discard a card. And whenever a card is put into a opponent's graveyard from anywhere, we put a +1 counter on the Haunt of Hightower. Now we have Butcher of Malakir. Butcher of Malakir is my favorite mono black card on a very powerful creature. It's Great Pact. Whenever Butcher of Malakir or another creature is put into a graveyard, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Now we have Defiant Bloodlord. Whenever we gain life, target opponent will lose that much life. Okay, now we have some creatures that aren't vampires, but are going to synergize very well with everything we're doing. So we have Zulaport Cutthroat, very similar to Blood Artist. Whenever Zulaport Cutthroat or another creature is put into a graveyard, each opponent will lose a life and will gain a life. And of course, we have Sheolder of the Apocalypse. Whenever we draw a card, we gain 2 life. Whenever a opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. And it's a 4/5 with Death Touch. Now we have Ayara, First of Locthwain. Whenever Ayara or another black creature enters the battlefield, each opponent will lose a life. We're going to gain a life. She also has a activated ability where we sacrifice another black creature, such as Silver Smoke Ghoul or Bloodghast, and we get to draw a card. Now we have Cryptghast. This has Extort, so whenever we cast a spell, we can pay a black. If we did, each opponent will lose a life and will gain a life. But whenever we tap a swamp for mana, we will add a additional black mana. Now we have Dread Presence. Whenever a swamp enters the battlefield, we can choose one. We can draw a card and lose a life, or Dread Presence will deal 2 damage to any target and will gain 2 life. Now we have Enduring Tenacity. Whenever we gain life, target opponent loses that much life. And if Enduring Tenacity would be put into a graveyard, we return it back to the battlefield as a enchantment. Now we have Sir Conrad. This card is fantastic. Sir Conrad only really cares about things being put into graveyards. So whenever another creature dies, or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature leaves the graveyard, it'll deal 1 damage to each opponent. But if we need to, we can pay a colorless and a black. Each player will mill the top card. And of course, we have Gary, or the Grey Merchant of Asphodel. When Grey Merchant of Asphodel enters the battlefield, each opponent is going to lose X life, and we're going to gain X life, where X is our devotion to black. Now we have Roaming Throne. Roaming Throne is going to benefit us very, very nicely, because everything will be a vampire, even if it's not. But it's a 4-cost 4/4 artifact creature with Ward 2. So our opponents will have to pay 2 colorless in order to target this. And when it enters, we choose a creature type. Roaming Throne is the chosen type in addition to its other types as well. But if a triggered ability of another creature we control of the chosen type triggers, it'll trigger a additional dime. We are running 1 singular Planeswalker in the entire deck. And of course, it's none other than Sorin Imperious Bloodlord. This is a fantastic Planeswalker. His +1 ability, target creature will gain Death Touch and Lifelink until end of turn. But if it's a vampire, we put a +1 counter on it. Or we can sacrifice a vampire, and if we do, it'll deal 3 damage to any target, and we gain 3 life. But more importantly, all we have to do is -3, and we can put any vampire card from our hand on the battlefield. Okay, let's get into the enchantments. Of course, we're playing Exquisite Blood. Whenever a opponent loses life, we gain that much life. Of course, we're playing Sanguine Bond. This is the opposite of Exquisite Blood. Whenever we gain life, target opponent loses that much life. So, if we have both of these out, all we have to do is gain 1 life, and the entire board dies. Now we have Grave Pact. Whenever a creature we control is put into a graveyard, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Now we have Grievous Wound. We're going to enchant a certain opponent. That enchanted player can't gain life. And whenever they're dealt damage, they lose half their life rounded up. And to continually use our life total as a resource, we're playing Phyrexian Arena. That way we can continually draw cards every single turn. Okay, let's get into the artifacts. We have our Soul Ring. We have our Elixir of Immortality. Not only will this gain us 5 life, but Elixir will help protect our graveyard in case our opponents try to exile our graveyard. Now we have Jet Medallion. That way all our black spells cause 1 less to play. We have Demon's Horn. Whenever any player casts a black spell, we gain a life. We have Bantu's Monument. Our black creature spells will cost 1 less. And whenever we cast a creature spell, each opponent will lose a life and we'll gain a life. Now we have Staff of the Death Magus. Whenever we cast a black spell or a swamp enters the battlefield under our control, we gain a life. And the big one, we have Bolas's Citadel. Because we're going to be gaining so much life, we can look at the top card of our library at any time. We can play the top card just by paying life. And then if we have 10 non-land permanents, we can sacrifice those, and each opponent will lose 10 life. We only have 2 instants in the entire deck. We have Dark Ritual and Vampiric Tutor. That way we can go get whatever card we want. Let's get into the sorceries. Of course, we have our Demonic Tutor, our Diabolic Intent. I kind of like Diabolic Intent as well, in addition to playing Demonic Tutor, because as a additional cost to cast Diabolic Intent, we sacrifice a creature. So that'll trigger any kind of death trigger as well. Now we have Feed the Swarm. That way we can destroy a creature, or more importantly, a enchantment. Because black has a very hard time dealing with enchantments. Now to kill all those creatures, we have Toxic Deluge and Damnation. Because we're going to be producing a lot of mana, we have Exsanguinate. This is the only X spell in the entire deck, but each opponent will lose X life, and we gain X life. Now we have Blood Tribute. This is a 6-cost sorcery, but it has Kicker. All we have to do is tap an untapped vampire. Target opponent will lose half their life rounded up, and if we kicked Blood Tribute, we gain life equal to the life that was lost. Okay, let's get into the land base. We have Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth. That way, every single land is a swamp. Cabal of Coffers. That way we can pay 2 colorless and add 1 black mana for each swamp we control. Cabal Stronghold. Similar to Cabal Coffers, but this costs 3 colorless to add 1 black mana for each basic swamp we control. Now we have Castle Locthwain. We're going to use Castle Locthwain to draw cards. We do lose life equal to the number of cards in our hand, but because we're gaining so much life, it's not really going to matter. And it's really good with shielded. Now we have Voldaren Estate, or Castle Dracula. This is going to help us create blood tokens, but this ability will cost one less to activate for each vampire we control. Now we have Takanuma, Abandoned Mire. We're going to mill 3 cards and then return a creature or planeswalker from our graveyard back to our hand. Now we have Phyrexian Tower. That way we can sacrifice a creature to add 2 black mana. Now we have Leech-Ridden Swamp. All we have to do is pay 1 black. Each opponent will lose 1 life. We can only activate this if we control 2 or more black permanents, but that shouldn't be a problem. And to deal with our opponent's graveyard, we have Bojuka Bog. Now, to produce as much black mana as possible, we have Lake of the Dead. When it enters the battlefield, we do have to sacrifice a swamp, but we can tap this for 1 black mana, or we sacrifice the swamp to add 4 black mana. Now we have Volrath Stronghold. We're going to use this to continually put a very powerful creature back on top of our library from our graveyard. It'll also help protect that creature from getting exiled from our graveyard. Now we have High Market. We're going to sacrifice a creature to gain 1 life. And to gain even more life, we have Myron the Moaning Well. We're going to pay 3 colorless, sacrifice a creature, but we're going to gain life equal to that creature's toughness. And we have 21 Swamps. And that was the Commander deck for Vito, Thorn of the Dust Rose. My little take on vampire life gain. I really hope you guys enjoyed this vampire deck. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, follow me on TikTok, share these videos. I'll put a link to Moxfield with the deck list. So if you guys have any suggestions, let me know in the comments below. And I'll see you guys in the next one.